Let's now move to Nairobi, Kenya to join Dr. Richard Munang, who is a policy development expert. Of course, he is a regular face on my Media Prime, and this is the first time he is participating on your Pan-African show, 90 Minutes in Africa. Dr. Richard Munang, I was just going through research, and I saw that the United States, for instance, provides more than 311 million US dollars in emergency and food assistance for people affected by major food crisis in the Sahel and West African regions. How can we understand this, that we are a country, we are a continent with trillions upon trillions of dollars worth of resources, yet we are being provided emergency food aid?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Elvis, and to the panelists for having me on this very prestigious show. And I couldn't agree more to what panelists have already put forward, but let me put it in perspective. The reality of the situation we face in Africa today is that of mindset. The ideology and the false narrative that has been driven for quite a very long time is that Africa's poverty is lack of material. And as a result of that, that has disabled the mind, what I call emotional poverty of many citizens, to think that they can be able to have when they have not put effort. A story is told of someone who was very, very sick in a Western hospital, and this person came from a very poor home. But this person decided that every day he will be able to go out and get fresh air, but as he goes out, he looked around in the hospital and picked those who are quite very, very sick to go out with them. What does this story tells us? We have to aim up and not aim down. Of course, the continent have got mineral resources, which, as panelists have already alluded to, after the independent dispensation, when our founding fathers fought for self-determined rule, the biggest mistake that because today was that they did not empower the citizens to become the aid that comes to food security. First of all, what is the scale of poverty that Africa measures herself against? A mother who lives in a village in a mud-stacked house, but eats fresh food, doesn't have any debt to pay, have access to clean drinking water from a well, and doesn't have any debt. Is she poor? And then a young person who is highly employed and earns 300,000 francs, maybe in a city in Douala, or 500,000 Kenyan shillings, or 10,000 nairas, etc., and is unable to pay rent, it's in debt, doesn't eat nutritious food, live in a city that is polluted, resulting to choking his or her lungs. Is that person rich or poor? So the point I'm bringing this is that in as much as we can look at our natural resources and talk about lack of value addition and talk about extraction not benefiting the continent and resulting to underdevelopment, we need to then look at which kind of development do Africa want. Is it a development that is benchmarked with others? Or is it a development that when you have more money, you are developed? And then now when you now look at the issue that you brought up of aid, especially when it comes to security. In the past 15 years, over 15 billion has come to the continent to address only food security issue. But today we have 257 million people who go to bed hungry. So if the issue was money, why are people still hungry? So the issue is not money alone. The issue is we do not add value to what we produce. The issue is we are also mentally starved to believe that if we are not given things, then we cannot be able to do what we can do using what we have, not only focusing on what we don't have. Because there is really nowhere where you can be able to transform. And then lastly, the aspect of leadership is true, but the leaders come from the very citizenry that the continent is made up of. After the independent dispensation, the citizenry that were groomed to focus on what is in it for me, rather than what can I do to be able to turn challenges into opportunities. The citizens were groomed to think that when you finish a degree, you must get a white-collar job, rather than thinking of what can I do to solve a community challenge to turn it into an opportunity. The citizens were groomed to complain and apportion blame to others except themselves, so that at least, and then that group of citizens ended up in leadership positions. And today, we are getting what we actually deserve. You can't eat your cake and have it. And so that model needs to change.
Thank you, Dr. Richard Munang. He is a policy development expert. Now you see an opportunity for Africa, Dr. Richard Munang, due to a rise in crude oil prices at the international market, an opportunity for the entire continent to benefit from. But in Nigeria, we don't know what has happened. No single franc has been paid into the federal government's account since January, according to presidential aspirant Peter Obi. What can be the cause of this?
Yeah, thanks again, Mr. Bo. Before I answer the question, let me just put this in perspective, because I think if we jump straight to talk about symptoms without necessarily actually getting to the underpinning of where the rain started beating us, we might not be able to provide practical solutions that can solve this. The first is that if you look at minerals in the continent, they do not contribute the bulk of the GDP. The agricultural sector in the continent contributes over 60% of the GDP in the continent and employs over 65% of the entire workforce. When you look at the mineral sectors, if you take Cameroon, for example, it only contributes 3.2% to the GDP. Over 34 to 37% of the GDP of Cameroon comes from the agro sector. Now, when it comes now to the question that you have asked, the reality is that, first of all, the petroleum products that are actually produced by Africa are not added value by Africans. If you look, when oil is discovered in the continent, petroleum is discovered, there is always that glamour and cheers of excitement by citizens thinking that that is automatically going to be turned into money. And as Mr. Elijah said, first of all, when you look at what is happening, the minerals and the petroleums and gas, actually, when it is tapped, it is processed elsewhere and then sold back to the continent at a very high price. So if Africa was adding value and processing these petroleum products, into gas finished products, of course, this will be marketed, and the high appetite that is needed at the moment will actually be traded across the entire African continent. So the point I'm trying to drive here is that if you think that you are going to make sure that your economy grows by focusing only on these mineral resources, you are going to run out at some point, because that is not sustainable and they also employ very few people. Diversification is the biggest security of a system. And the best way to diversify is to start adding value to this raw material, but at the same time also investing the proceeds in the agro sector, so that people can then be able to afford some of these goods without necessarily having to depend whether the country is rich in in mineral resources or not. Just to touch on this point that Elijah touched on, I think, and Apostle Ambe also touched on. Regardless of an excellent leader, and I mean this is reality, of course leaders provide vision, and visions go beyond slogans. Visions are not slogans. Visions are actually an imagination. No matter how excellent a leader is, if the quality of the citizens and don't have the right attitude for work, no matter what you do, nothing will actually change. What am I trying to say here? We cannot discuss this issue missing the aspect of software, as I call it. How people's attitudes can actually be engineered to start now doing what they need to do, not only talking about blame game citizenry today needs a revamping. The software needs to be gotten right. The attitude to work, the attitude to become passionate, the attitude to know that at least we must work with what we have to get what we don't have. Unless we start moving in this direction, regardless of whether the mineral resources in the continent are actually sold within the continent, are actually done in a way that excellent deals are negotiated, which they should be, we might still not address the poverty challenges and the unemployment challenges we face. So we need a reimagination. And that reimagination needs to start thinking, how do we refinance our development using our local structures that are accessible to those who are in the community? Because I was speaking today, 80% of the jobs created in Africa are created by the informal sector. These are our mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters in the communities, in villages. And the financial gap that can be tapped from where they are is 300 billion US dollars. But it's not currently being tapped today. Nobody talks about leveraging on cooperatives, which actually they contribute up to 55% of the GDP of the entire African continent. We then now go depend on aid, and actually as we speak, economic distress today. Taking loans, not investing those loans in areas that are catalytic to bring high returns on investment, taking loans and focusing in areas, yes, we need infrastructure, but infrastructure for what? Infrastructure should be connecting farms to markets so that mothers who produce their food can have access to market. Do not reimagine our economic development within leadership that is not only about those who are at the top, but about every citizen, then we might continuously face these calamities, and especially these kind of emergencies that we are facing today with fuel, with food, and Africa will continue to be impoverished.
Thank you, Dr. Richard Munang. Dr. Richard, we cannot underestimate, for instance, the role some foreign nations like France play in the politics of Africa. Of course, with accusations, especially from countries that were colonized by France. We've heard of accusations related to control over the natural resources of former French Africa colonies, control of their foreign reserves. They control our own currency. They control the monetary policy. And one of the countries that does that is France. Can we say some of these points? Can we say some of these points do not contribute to the poor development in the country? Because from what Elijah Nwaku seems to say, I mean, we might go home with the impression that these guys have not done anything wrong for Africa.
I mean, let's put facts together. Across the entire world, only 11 countries were not colonized. Let me repeat it again. Across the entire world, only 11 countries were not colonized. Is Africa state today with 54 countries as a result of only colonization? Of course, there are issues that you can touch a bit and link to colonization. The United States was colonized by Britain. Canada was colonized by Britain. India was colonized. China was colonized by Japan. Why are those countries today not the same like Africa? So, in as much as there is a link to colonization, it cannot be the sole reason why we are where we are today. The reason why we are where we are today is that we do not understand exactly what we want as a country. And it's a fact. I mean, some people might not like it, but let's be truthful sometimes to the reality so that we can be able to address the issues. If you do not know your interests, you will definitely never be able to succeed in the global space. It's about interest, and that is why you will see every country in the world have an ambassador representing the interests of that country. If you are an ambassador of the United States in Cameroon, represent the interests of the United States. The ambassador of Cameroon in the United States represents the interests of the United States. And what are these interests? They are economic, social, environmental, political interests that should then be able to favor the country. What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that if we pin everything only to a colonial master, that song we are going to sing till Jesus Christ comes back to this earth. Why? The global architecture to get the best value when you sit on the table. And that takes me to the point of what I mentioned. We have been prided as resilient people in the continent that we survive colonization, that we survive diseases and we survive malaria. We are resilient. Yes, we are. But resilience is not what matters in this global space today. What matters is value. And value is created. Value is about being strategic. Value is about organizing your people so they can be able to co-create solutions to the challenges you face so that you can use the outcomes of those challenges that have been sent to people. Where did it stop Africans because of colonial masters? Which of them, either it was Britain or France or Japan that colonized China? Has China ever sat anywhere and been complaining that, oh, we were colonized by Japan and we are going to follow our own way and drive our own development in our own culture? Where did it stop Africans to say, okay, we are going to build the skills of our people and make sure that since we have 365 days of sunshine, we're going to tap the sun and add value to our agricultural produce and tap into the agro market that exists in the continent that is worth $150 billion US. Which colonial master to African countries to import food for 48 billion? That is worth between 35 billion to 48 billion. They are using food in the continent every year worth 48 billion US dollars as their citizens go to bed hungry. What is missing in Africa is lack of reimagination. If you do not reimagine using into the future, you cannot have solutions. And what will happen is that people tap into the weaknesses that you project and then capitalize on it because the world is about interest. So the point is, if we do not realize that we have to offer value, and offering value is not about slavery. And I keep saying it's about getting your people to work, inspiring them, creating the enabling environment, creating policies that are responsive to the real needs of the people, so they can create wealth and put in their pocket, and of course, pay taxes that can be used to build growth, can be used to put the requisite infrastructure. That's how you develop a country. When you start to do that, foreign partners will engage with you from a position of strength, and you will negotiate from a position of strength, and you will drive transformation. Why I brought up this dimension is that Africa is not an island. And sometimes if we do not recognize that we are part of the past, it's quite very, very sensitive. We might end up losing reality and fail to reimagine the future, which would be very, very disastrous for the continent.
Can we say, Dr. Richard Munang, that are we going to lose some resources in the continent as a result of climate change? I want you to talk about that before we get to the solutions, with beginning with Apostle Ambe, because you are an environment scientist, and of course you master these issues related to climate change. Are there some resources that we might lose in Africa if we don't pay particular attention to climate change, for instance?
Actually, Africa is already losing its GDP as we speak today. If you take Cameroon is losing its GDP 5%, and in the next 10 years, Cameroon will lose up to 50% of its GDP. But this is a continent, let me put it in perspective, that has contributed just 2 to 3% of the emissions that are actually suffering one of the worst impacts of climate. We're talking now, there are droughts in East Africa here as we speak that are actually affecting over 25 million people. We're talking, there are floods that have plunged southern African regions, and we are seeing droughts in the Sahel. So these are actually contributing to the economic stress, because when you grow your food and you are unable to harvest, you can't feed your family. When the source of livelihood is depreciated, then that continuously plunges millions of people into suffering. So, but this is the point here. Climate change is a disguised opportunity. We are now talking at a time whereby the African continent have actually ratified what is called the Paris Change Agreement, which is pretty much agreement for countries to lower emissions, and countries develop simple plan to ensure that the agricultural systems are transformed, to ensure that energy can reach millions of people across the continent. We have 620 million citizens who are energy impoverished. But Africa have 365 days of sunshine. That then means there is no justification for any citizen in Africa not to have access to electricity. And this electricity, to be able to reach mothers in community, needs to be what we call upgrade, which means we need to now start using what is called solar energy. But to use solar energy, we also need to ensure that at least we have the enabling policies in place. And most African countries are putting these enabling policies in place. So we need to appreciate and applaud progress where there is progress. Africa is a leader when it comes to policies. But we need to graduate from being excellent in policy to now become excellent in implementation. Because the biggest gap that continuously perpetuates the poverty in Africa is that paper policies are not translated to real impact on the ground by implementation. This is where we need citizens to engage, because citizens are the constituents of implementation, but the role of government is to create an enabling policy. And sometimes when you hear that government should do this, do that, I actually cringe, because government rule is not necessarily implementation, but creating enabling environment, and the citizens have those incentives to implement in such a way that they can create for themselves. And therefore, with the changing climate today, countries are putting enabling empowerment. Cameroon actually submitted what is called revised indices, and then Cameroon is a leader when it comes to the climate change policy space. That's true. Let's give credit where it's due. Nigeria, Kenya, Zambia, South Africa, all African countries are leaders. But where there's a problem is implementation of the and the solution to implement this is to incentivize the youthful population, because you can only put the world you have yet. So they say Africa's youth are Africa's climate army, but they don't care about climate change as an issue. They will seize the opportunities from the perspective of how to create wealth and actually create jobs. And what does government need to do? Incentivize them. Start using money for poverty reduction, channel these through cooperatives so that young people, even at the local community, can be able to access cooperatives in those communities and use that money to be able to tap into just turning simple agricultural waste into fuel briquettes that replace charcoal. If I take Cameroon, for example, 7,000 Cameroonians die every year as a result of soil pollution. If we were to compare this with concrete, about 3,000 to 4,000 people died. But 7,000 every year. But what's the solution? Simple. Incentivize young people. Give resources so that at least they can be trained and start turning agricultural waste to replace trade. Tap into an economy of 20 billion. And the last part of climate change is that Africa's transformation will not happen without using climate change as a development solution. And unless we do that, we will continuously build infrastructure where we'll be flooded. We will build houses to get returns. And therefore, climate transformation needs to become part and parcel of transformational development.
Let's get to Dr. Richard Munang to get his own views about solutions, his approach towards the solution for Africa to be able to equitably distribute its wealth and make good use of its resources. Dr. Richard Munang.
Yeah, thanks again, and thanks to Apostle Lambe and Elijah. I think they have given a very salient point. I will do on that. The first point is that you do not fight existing reality. And I think this is something Africans everywhere should learn. What you do is you develop models, innovative models that make existing realities obsolete. Because fighting the existing reality will not be with the same approaches, with the same mentality, and expect to rear crocodiles when you don't have a pond. That's where Africa is today. We try to do what we are not good at, and what we are good at, we abandon. And I think the panelists have alluded to this. We import food when we are actually supposed to be the bread basket for the world. And then we export employment, like Elijah said. Those of us who took tea or coffee this morning or afternoon, wherever we are, that coffee is produced in the continent, but it is packaged and processed somewhere and then exported to the continent here. So that's a misnomer. The first point is we must be able to develop models, because I'm trying to say that to allude to the fact that, of course, every country should have its own central bank. Of course, Africa should have its own African central bank, which is currently a discussion with the African Union Agenda 2063. But those countries that have their own central bank, are they really where they're supposed to be? There is something still missing. Of course, there needs to be a central bank of every country, but let's not just say that we need a central bank. If we get it, that's fine. But we need to look beyond that and say, why can't we work with what we have as we aim to get the best of what it's supposed to be? The other aspect is we are focused in the continent with distributive economy. Distributive economy cannot grow Africa because it will always leave many at the bottom of the pyramid. We must focus on productive economies. And what is the simplicity of what I'm saying here? Empower our youth so they can be able to start turning challenges to opportunities in the areas in which Africa have an advantage in. The agricultural sector is not just about production. It's about color dryers. Can help a mother in the village dry her tomatoes, her vegetables, her cassava, her beans. That way you will make money and you will encourage young people to become solution providers and address a bigger problem.
Okay.
Grow the economy from both.
Dr. Munang, maybe
We must reimagine our financial models, because the discussion around finance is mostly about aid, and sometimes this is not really helping. What about the barter system that Africa used to use before? So that if you have a head of cattle, you can be able to pay school fees with. You have a bag of rice, you can be able to pay hospital camp and parcel. Then the last aspect is, with that entrepreneurial spirit in the continent, it might be quite very, very difficult to drive inclusive economies. So entrepreneurship should become part and parcel of the educational curriculum of every country in the continent. That way we can drive enterprising Africa, but importantly, that's the only way you can get what you expect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Richard Munang. On that note, we come to the end of the program. Thank you so much, Dr. Richard Munang, who is an international development.
Elvis, and thanks to the viewers and to the panelists. Touched on very important aspects. It's an exciting show, and I believe that this is actually a mindset